The world that won't stop talking. What if the world is built for the wrong personality? What if everything you've been told about success is incomplete? What if being quiet is not a weakness, but a hidden advantage? Because in a world that never stops talking, silence has become rare, and anything rare becomes powerful. Look around you. We live in a world that celebrates noise. The loudest voice in the room gets attention. The most outgoing person gets opportunities. The fastest speaker often wins the conversation. From early childhood, this message is reinforced. In classrooms, students are rewarded for raising their hands quickly, for speaking confidently, for participating actively. In workplaces, employees are expected to share ideas instantly, speak up in meetings, network constantly. From school classrooms to corporate boardrooms, one message repeats again and again: speak up, stand out, be bold. And slowly, something subtle begins to happen. We start believing that volume equals value, that confidence equals competence, that being heard matters more than thinking deeply. But what about those who don't operate this way? What about the people who pause before speaking, who observe before reacting, who prefer meaningful conversations over constant interaction, the ones who think carefully before they speak at all? These individuals often experience the world differently. Crowded environments drain them. Continuous social interaction exhausts them. Noise overwhelms their ability to focus. But instead of understanding this difference, society often labels it shy, reserved, antisocial. Labels that imply something is missing, something is wrong, something needs to be fixed. But what if that assumption is completely incorrect? What if quiet people are not lacking something, but operating with a different kind of strength? In Quiet, Susan Cain presents a powerful and transformative idea. Quiet people are not broken. They are not inferior. They are simply wired differently. And more importantly, their strengths are often invisible in a loud world. Because introverts bring something rare: depth, focus, thoughtfulness. They listen more carefully, they think more deeply, they create more intentionally. And throughout history, many of the most creative, innovative, and impactful individuals were not the loudest voices in the room. They were the quiet observers, the deep thinkers, the ones who didn't rush to speak, but spoke when it truly mattered. In a world obsessed with noise, quiet becomes power. The rise of the extrovert ideal. A century ago, character defined success. Today, personality sells. And in that shift, something important was lost. In the early 20th century, society valued something very different from what it values today. Success was built on character, qualities like integrity, discipline, humility, reliability. People were respected not for how loudly they spoke, but for how deeply they thought. Not for how much attention they attracted, but for how consistently they acted. Reputation was built slowly, through actions, through values, through quiet strength. But as the world began to change, so did the definition of success. Industrialization expanded businesses. Urbanization brought people closer together. Competition increased, and with it, the need to stand out. This gave rise to a new cultural model, the extrovert ideal. Under this new ideal, success was no longer just about who you were. It became about how you appeared. Charisma became currency. Confidence became a performance. Social dominance became an advantage. Suddenly, people were encouraged to speak more in meetings, network aggressively, promote themselves constantly. The ability to sell became more valuable than the ability to think deeply. Salesmanship replaced substance. Presence replaced depth. and slowly, the world began to favor those who could command attention. This shift didn't just change workplaces, it changed education. Children were rewarded for participation, for speaking up quickly, for being outgoing and expressive. Meanwhile, those who preferred to observe, to reflect, to think quietly, were often overlooked or misunderstood. Introverts began to feel this pressure early, the pressure to adapt, to speak more than they naturally would, to act more energetic, to become more socially visible. In many cases, to become someone they were not. And over time, this creates a silent conflict, because when people constantly try to match an identity that doesn't align with their nature, they begin to disconnect from their strengths. They suppress their natural way of thinking. They ignore their need for depth. They overlook the advantages of being reflective. And in trying to fit into the extrovert ideal, many people lose what makes them unique. They lose their ability to focus deeply, to think independently, to create meaningfully, because the world taught them that being quiet was something to overcome instead of something to understand. Introversion versus extroversion explained. Introversion is not shyness. It's not fear. It's not a flaw. It's biology. And once you understand this, you stop trying to fix yourself and start understanding how you actually work. Introversion is one of the most misunderstood traits in human psychology. It is often confused with shyness, but they are not the same. Shyness is the fear of social judgment. It is anxiety about how others perceive you. But introversion is something entirely different. It is about energy, about how your brain responds to stimulation and how you recharge. Extroverts are energized by stimulation. They thrive in environments filled with conversation, movement, activity, social interaction. For them, being around people increases energy. The more engagement they have, the more alive they feel. That's why extroverts often enjoy group discussions, networking events, fast-paced environments. But introverts operate differently. Their nervous system responds more strongly to stimulation, which means too much noise, too much activity, too much social interaction can quickly become overwhelming. Instead of energizing them, it drains them. That's why introverts feel restored in different environments. They recharge through solitude, quiet reflection, deep focus. This is not avoidance, it is recovery. It is how their brain resets. Scientific research supports this difference. Studies suggest that introverts process information more deeply. Their brains are more sensitive to dopamine, the chemical linked to reward and stimulation. While extroverts seek dopamine-driven excitement, introverts can feel overstimulated by it. So instead, they rely more on a different pathway, one associated with calm focus and internal processing. This is why introverts tend to think before they speak, analyze before they act, observe before they engage. They don't rush to respond. They take time to understand. And in a fast-moving world, this can be misunderstood as hesitation. But in reality, it is depth. Introverts are not slower. They are more deliberate. They are not disengaged. They are more internally engaged. They are not lacking confidence. They are simply selective with their energy. This is why comparing introverts and extroverts is misleading, because they are not better or worse versions of each other. They are different systems, different ways of interacting with the world, different ways of thinking, different ways of recharging. It's like comparing a sports car and an electric vehicle. Both are powerful, but they operate differently. And once you understand this, you stop forcing yourself into environments that drain you. You stop measuring your energy by someone else's standard, and instead, you begin to work with your nature, not against it. The power of deep thinking. Great ideas are rarely born in noise. They don't appear in crowded rooms. They don't emerge from constant distraction. They are built in silence. One of the greatest strengths of introverts is something the modern world often overlooks: deep thinking. While many environments reward speed, introverts naturally prioritize depth. They don't rush to respond. They pause. They analyze. They reflect. They connect ideas that others might miss. Where some people react quickly, introverts think carefully. And this difference changes everything. Because quick reactions may win conversations, but deep thinking builds insight, it builds understanding, it builds originality. Introverts tend to process information more thoroughly. They explore multiple perspectives. They question assumptions. They look beneath the surface. This leads to something incredibly valuable: better decisions. Not decisions made under pressure, but decisions shaped by clarity, by reflection, by careful evaluation. This same depth also fuels creativity, because creativity is not just about imagination, it's about connecting ideas in new ways, and that requires time. Time to explore, time to experiment, time to let thoughts evolve. Many of the world's most important innovations did not emerge from busy environments. They were developed in solitude, in quiet rooms, in moments of uninterrupted focus. Because creativity requires space: space to think without interruption, space to explore ideas without pressure, space to imagine without distraction. But in today's world, that space is becoming rare. We live in an age of constant stimulation: notifications, messages, endless streams of information. Attention is fragmented, focus is interrupted, and thinking becomes shallow. People move from one idea to another without going deep into any of them. This is where introverts have a unique advantage. Their natural preference for quiet environments protects their ability to focus, to concentrate, to think deeply. And in a world where most people are distracted, the ability to focus becomes powerful. Because depth creates value. While others skim the surface, introverts dive deeper. They uncover insights others overlook. They build ideas others cannot see. And over time, this depth compounds. It leads to innovation, to mastery, to meaningful work. Because the most valuable ideas are not always the fastest. They are the ones that are thought through the most. The myth of group work. More collaboration doesn't always create better ideas. Sometimes it does the opposite. Modern workplaces are built around one dominant belief: collaboration creates innovation. Open office layouts, team brainstorming sessions, constant meetings, endless discussions. The idea is simple: put more people together and better ideas will emerge. But research tells a different story. In many cases, group work can actually reduce creativity, not because people lack intelligence, but because of how groups behave. When individuals enter a group setting, something subtle begins to happen: pressure. Pressure to fit in, pressure to agree, pressure to avoid standing out too much. People begin filtering their thoughts. They hesitate to share unconventional ideas. They hold back opinions that might challenge the group, because no one wants to appear wrong or disruptive or different. This is called conformity pressure, and it quietly limits creativity. There is also another problem: speed. In group discussions, ideas must be expressed quickly. The fastest speakers dominate. The quickest thinkers take control of the conversation. But not all ideas arrive instantly. Some ideas require time: time to process, time to connect, time to refine. Introverts often need this time, not because they lack ideas, but because they think more deeply before expressing them. In fast-paced group environments, their ideas can be overlooked or never shared at all. This creates a misleading perception. It appears as if introverts contribute less, but in reality, they are processing more. Another hidden issue with group work is noise. Constant interaction interrupts focus. People switch attention repeatedly, and deep thinking becomes difficult because creativity requires uninterrupted concentration. It requires mental space, and that space is often missing in collaborative environments. This is why many of the best ideas don't emerge in meetings. They emerge afterward, when individuals step away, when the noise fades, when the mind has time to think independently. This leads to an important insight. Collaboration is valuable, but only at the right stage. The most effective process is not constant teamwork. It is a combination. First, independent thinking, time to explore ideas individually, time to develop original perspectives. Then, collaboration, where ideas are shared, refined, and improved. When this balance is achieved, creativity increases because individuals bring fully formed ideas instead of incomplete thoughts. In a world obsessed with constant collaboration, the ability to think alone becomes a competitive advantage because true innovation often begins in silence. The strength of listening. The best communicators are not the ones who speak the most. They are the ones who understand the most. And understanding begins with listening. In a world where everyone is trying to be heard, listening has become rare. Conversations often turn into competitions. Who can speak first? Who can respond faster? Who can dominate the discussion? But real communication doesn't work that way, because communication is not just about expressing ideas, it's about understanding people. And this is where introverts have a powerful advantage. Introverts are naturally inclined to listen. They don't rush to interrupt. They don't feel the need to fill every silence. Instead, they observe, they absorb, they process what is being said, and more importantly, what is not being said. They pay attention to tone of voice, body language, subtle emotional shifts. They notice hesitation. They detect discomfort. They recognize enthusiasm. This deeper level of attention allows them to understand people more accurately. And when people feel understood, something powerful happens. They open up. They become more honest, more expressive, more willing to share ideas and concerns. Because being heard is one of the most fundamental human needs. And when that need is met, trust begins to form. Trust is not built through talking, it is built through listening. This is why introverts often build stronger, more meaningful relationships, not because they speak less, but because when they do speak, it is thoughtful, it is relevant, it is impactful. Their words carry weight because they are based on understanding. In leadership, this becomes a superpower. Many people assume leadership requires constant speaking, giving instructions, motivating teams, driving conversations. But the most effective leaders do something different. They listen. They create space for others to speak. They encourage input. They make people feel valued. Because when individuals feel heard, they feel respected. And when they feel respected, they become more engaged, more committed, more motivated to contribute. Listening also improves decision-making because leaders who listen gather more information. They understand different perspectives, they avoid blind spots, and they make more balanced choices. In contrast, leaders who dominate conversations often miss critical insights because they are too focused on speaking to notice what others are trying to say. In a noisy world, listening becomes a rare skill, and rare skills become powerful advantages because while others are trying to be heard, the person who listens understands, and the person who understands leads. Solitude fuels greatness. Solitude is not loneliness. It is not isolation. It is not weakness. It is strength. And in a world addicted to noise, it becomes a superpower. Solitude is often misunderstood. People associate it with being alone, with disconnection, with emptiness. But true solitude is something very different. It is not the absence of people, it is the presence of clarity. Introverts naturally seek solitude, not because they dislike social interaction, but because they need space to reset, space to think, space to process, space to reconnect with their own thoughts. Every interaction, every conversation, every stimulus consumes mental energy. And for introverts, this energy depletes faster. Without time alone, their thinking becomes scattered, their focus weakens, their creativity declines. But when they step into solitude, something changes. The noise fades, the mind slows down, and clarity begins to return. Solitude creates the conditions for clear thinking, deep focus, and emotional balance. It allows thoughts to settle. It allows ideas to develop. It allows emotions to be understood instead of reacted to. In contrast, constant interaction fragments attention, notifications interrupt thought, conversations overlap, the mind jumps from one stimulus to another, and depth disappears. This is why many of the world's most influential thinkers, creators, and innovators relied heavily on solitude, not as an escape, but as a tool for thinking deeply, for creating meaningfully, for solving complex problems. Because breakthrough ideas rarely appear in chaos, they emerge in stillness, in moments when the mind has space to wander, to connect ideas, to explore possibilities without interruption. Solitude also plays a critical role in emotional well-being. It allows individuals to process experiences, to reflect on interactions, to understand their own feelings. Without this space, emotions accumulate. They remain unresolved, and over time, this creates stress. But solitude provides a reset, a moment to pause, to breathe, to regain control. In today's world, silence is becoming rare. People fill every moment with stimulation, music, social media, constant communication. But in doing so, they eliminate the very space where insight is created. Because silence is not empty, it is full of answers. And those who learn to embrace solitude gain access to something powerful: clarity in thinking, depth in creativity, stability in emotion. In a world that never stops talking, the ability to be alone with your thoughts becomes a competitive advantage. Because solitude doesn't disconnect you from the world, it prepares you to engage with it more effectively. Leadership without loudness. You don't need to be loud to lead. You don't need to dominate conversations to influence people. Because true leadership is not about being seen, it's about being effective. When most people imagine a leader, they picture someone charismatic, confident, commanding, someone who speaks with authority, takes control of the room, and dominates conversations. This image has been shaped by the extrovert ideal, the belief that leadership requires constant visibility, constant expression, constant energy. But real leadership works differently, because leadership is not about how much you speak, it's about how much impact you create. And introverts approach leadership in a unique way. They don't rush to speak, they listen first. They observe carefully. They process information deeply before making decisions. This creates a different kind of authority, one that is not loud, but grounded. Instead of dominating conversations, introverted leaders create space for others to speak, space for ideas to emerge, space for collaboration to happen naturally. They encourage input, they invite perspectives, they make people feel heard. And when people feel heard, they feel valued. When they feel valued, they become more engaged, more motivated, more committed to contributing. This is how strong teams are built, not through control, but through trust. Introverted leaders also tend to be more strategic. They take time to think through decisions. They consider multiple perspectives. They anticipate challenges. Instead of reacting quickly, they respond thoughtfully. And this leads to better outcomes, especially in complex situations. Another powerful strength of introverted leadership is empowerment. Instead of seeking attention for themselves, they shift the focus to the team. They recognize talent. They support growth. They allow others to shine. And this creates an environment where people feel confident to contribute. Because leadership is not about being the center of attention, it's about bringing out the best in others. In contrast, leaders who dominate conversations often unintentionally suppress ideas. Team members hesitate to speak, creativity decreases, and decision-making becomes limited. But when leaders step back and allow others to step forward, the entire team becomes stronger. This is the quiet power of introverted leadership. It doesn't rely on volume, it relies on understanding. It doesn't depend on control, it depends on trust. And in today's complex world, where collaboration, creativity, and emotional intelligence matter more than ever, this style of leadership becomes incredibly valuable. Because the most effective leader in the room is not always the one speaking the most. It is often the one who listens the best, thinks the deepest, and acts with intention. Finding balance. Ambiverts. What if you don't have to choose between being quiet and being outgoing? What if the real advantage is knowing when to be both? For a long time, personality has been treated like a fixed label. You are either an introvert or an extrovert, quiet or outgoing, reserved or expressive. But human behavior is more flexible than that. Many people exist somewhere in between. They are called ambiverts. Ambiverts are not locked into one mode of behavior. They can adapt. They can step into social energy when needed and step back into reflection when required. They understand both worlds, and this gives them a unique advantage because different situations demand different responses. Sometimes you need to speak, to lead, to express ideas confidently. Other times you need to listen, to observe, to think deeply before acting. The problem arises when people try to force themselves into one identity, when introverts feel pressure to always be outgoing, or extroverts feel uncomfortable slowing down. This creates friction because it goes against natural tendencies. But the goal is not to change who you are. It is to understand how you function best and use that awareness strategically. Introverts, for example, can learn to step out of their comfort zone when necessary, to speak up in moments that matter, to share ideas when they are valuable, not by becoming extroverted, but by acting with intention. Similarly, extroverts can develop the ability to pause, to listen more, to reflect before reacting, to create space for deeper thinking. Because growth doesn't mean abandoning your nature, it means expanding your range, learning when to act and when to step back. This is where true balance emerges, not in becoming someone else, but in becoming more adaptable, more aware, more in control of your responses. Balance creates flexibility, and flexibility creates effectiveness. Because the most successful individuals are not those who fit one category perfectly, they are the ones who understand themselves deeply and adjust their behavior based on the situation. In a noisy world, they know when to speak. In a complex situation, they know when to think. And in a fast-moving environment, they know when to pause. Because true strength is not found in extremes, it is found in balance. Quiet is power. The world may reward loudness. It celebrates speed, visibility, constant expression. The people who speak the most are often noticed first. The people who act quickly are often rewarded fastest. But beneath all that noise, something important is missing: depth. Because while loudness attracts attention, depth creates impact. And the world today desperately needs more of it. It needs people who think before they speak, people who listen before they react, people who observe before they judge. This is where introverts bring something powerful, something rare, something essential. They bring thoughtfulness, the ability to slow down and consider what truly matters. They bring creativity, not the loud, attention-seeking kind, but the quiet, meaningful kind. Ideas developed over time, refined through reflection, built with intention. They bring insight, the kind that doesn't come from reacting quickly, but from understanding deeply. Introverts often see what others miss because they are not distracted by constant noise. They notice patterns. They recognize subtle shifts. They understand people in ways that go beyond surface-level interaction. They think what others overlook, because while others move quickly, introverts take the time to explore, to question, to connect ideas in ways that are not immediately obvious. And because of this, they create what others cannot, not because they are louder, but because they are deeper. For a long time, being quiet has been misunderstood, seen as hesitation, as lack of confidence, as something to overcome. But the truth is very different. Being quiet is not a limitation. It is not something that needs to be fixed. It is a different kind of strength, a strength rooted in clarity, in focus, in awareness. And when this strength is understood, when it is embraced instead of suppressed, it becomes a powerful advantage. Because in a world overwhelmed by noise, the ability to think clearly becomes rare. In a world driven by constant reaction, the ability to pause becomes powerful. In a world focused on being seen, the ability to understand becomes invaluable. And those who can combine these abilities will not just succeed, they will stand out in a way that truly matters, not through volume, but through impact. So the next time you feel the pressure to speak louder, to act faster, to become more like everyone else, pause. And remember this: you don't need to match the noise to make a difference. You don't need to compete for attention to create value. Because quiet people don't just exist in the background. When they understand their strength, they shape the world in ways that are deeper, stronger, and far more lasting.